Imagine waking up one morning not with fear or anxiety, but with an eerie sense of certainty. The day, maybe even the hour, that death will come knocking. Imagine saying it out loud, and then being right. Sounds like something out of a supernatural thriller, doesn't it? But these aren't stories from fiction. These are real-life accounts of people who predicted their own deaths and nailed it with chilling accuracy. Some made poetic proclamations, others did the math. But in every case, death came as scheduled. Let's begin with a literary genius whose final curtain call was written in the stars. #10. Mark Twain and the Comet That Took Him. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, wasn't just a master of satire, he was, in many ways, a master of timing. Twain was born in 1835, the same year Halley's comet made one of its rare visits near Earth. Throughout his life, he spoke often about the comet, fascinated by its majestic return every 75 years. But in 1909, as Halley's comet prepared for its next approach, Twain said something that would freeze in literary history. "I came in with Halley's comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." People thought he was being metaphorical, poetic, maybe even a little dramatic in that signature Twain fashion. But he wasn't joking. He was deadly serious. Fate seemed to agree. On April 20th, 1910, Halley's comet reached its closest point to Earth, the very next day. April 21st, Mark Twain died of a heart attack at the age of 74. The precision is unsettling. The poetic symmetry is haunting. How many people can say they came in with a celestial event and left with it too? The odds of being born and dying with the return of Halley's comet are extraordinarily rare. But to declare it in advance, almost like he knew, gives his story a ghostly edge. Was it intuition? Coincidence? Or did Twain understand something about his own cosmic rhythm that we'll never quite grasp? 9. Abraham de Moivre. Death by math. Abraham de Moivre wasn't a poet. He was a mathematician, a master of probability theory, and a man who saw the world through the cold clarity of numbers. Born in 1667 in France, de Moivre fled religious persecution and built his intellectual legacy in England. But in his twilight years, he noticed something strange. Each night seemed to be sleeping 15 minutes longer than the night before. Now, most people would dismiss this as aging. De Moivre, however, calculated it. He tracked the trend and concluded with mathematical precision that he would sleep 24 hours straight on November 27, 1754, and that would be the day he died. It wasn't just a random guess, he told friends. He wrote it down, genuinely believed his body was following a measurable pattern, straight into the grave. And on November 27, 1754, right on schedule, Abraham de Moivre died. There was no major illness, no accident. He wasn't bedridden. He simply expired, quietly, predictably, as if he had counted down the minutes until his final breath. Was it a case of psychological programming? Did his belief in numbers become so powerful that his body simply followed orders? Or was it another freakish coincidence that seemed too perfect to ignore? Historians debate the implications. Some see it as a curiosity. Others consider it one of the most haunting, self-fulfilling prophecies ever recorded. Either way, de Moivre became the only person in history to calculate his own death and get it exactly right. Now, let's pause for a moment and consider the chilling overlap between these two stories. One man shaped the world with words, the other shaped it with numbers. And yet both ended their lives with a precise, almost theatrical prediction of their end. Twain tied his fate to a comet. De Moivre tied his to the ticking clock of his own sleep. One left behind iconic novels, the other left behind mathematical theorems. But what they shared, above all else, was a calm certainty in the face of the unknown. A certainty that most of us fear even thinking about. And they're just the beginning. In the parts to come, we'll meet people who made their death predictions in dreams. On live radio, and even in front of national audiences, some saw signs. Others felt something crawling under their skin, and a few even laughed as they walked into fate's open arms. But before we go any further, ask yourself this. If you somehow knew your own death was approaching, would you announce it to the world? Would you whisper it to your loved ones? Or keep it locked inside? And if you did say it out loud, would the universe hear you? We've only just opened the door to a world where intuition, fate, and sheer terror walk hand in hand. Sometimes, a prediction is made in private, a quiet comment to a friend, a chilling entry in a journal. But other times, it's recorded, spoken live, broadcasted to thousands. And when that person dies exactly as they described, the world is left reeling. Was it just coincidence? Or did they speak something into existence that couldn't be taken back? Let's continue with two terrifyingly accurate death calls, one spoken into a microphone and one dreamt night after night. Number 8, Frank Pastore, a radio host's final broadcast. Frank Pastore was a former Major League Baseball pitcher turned Christian radio host in California. Charismatic and thoughtful, he was known for weaving philosophy, faith, and practical life advice into his daily broadcasts. But on November 19, 2012, Frank said something in air that would later haunt everyone who heard it. That afternoon, the topic was life after death. While speaking about the risks of riding a motorcycle, his preferred mode of travel, he said, "You know, if I were to get hit by a car today and my body is in pieces on the freeway, I know where I'm going." His co-host chuckled awkwardly. The comment seemed a bit dark, maybe just hypothetical, maybe just radio banter. But only 3 hours later, as Frank rode his motorcycle home from the studio on the 210 freeway, a car swerved into his lane and struck him. His body was thrown from the motorcycle, suffered severe head trauma, and fell into a coma. He died a few weeks later, never regaining consciousness. Listeners were in shock. Thousands called the station, flooded social media, and replayed the recording. The timeline was chilling. The language he used on a almost word for word described exactly what had happened. Some believed he had a premonition. Others said it was just morbid coincidence. But those closest to Frank believed he truly felt something that day, as if in his final show, he had one last message to deliver about faith, fear, and fate. Number 7, David Booth. The dream that came true in the spring of 1979. A 23-year-old office worker named David Booth began having a terrifying recurring dream. Every night for 10 straight nights, he saw the same vivid image. A large commercial plane trying to take off. One of its engines failed. The plane banked hard to the left and crashed in a massive fireball. There were no survivors. The dream was so specific and so disturbing that Booth contacted the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, in Cincinnati. He told officials about the dream, described the plane as a DC-10, and begged them to investigate. They filed his report but didn't know what to do with it. After all, people report strange dreams all the time, but Booth's dreams didn't stop. Each night, the same image, the same crash, the same horror. Then, on May 25, 1979, just days after he made his final call to the FAA, American Airlines Flight 191, ADC-10 aircraft, took off from Chicago O'Hare Airport. Moments after liftoff, one of its engines detached. The plane veered violently to the left, exactly as in Booth's dream, and crashed into a field, killing all 271 people on board. At the time, it was the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. When the news broke, David Booth was devastated. He hadn't sought attention. He didn't claim to be psychic. He just wanted to prevent something horrible. But no one had believed him. The FAA later confirmed that Booth had contacted them before the crash and that his description had matched the accident with unnerving precision. His story became a case study in premonitions. Psychologists, aviation experts, and paranormal researchers all weighed in. Some said it was luck. Others believed it was a form of subconscious pattern recognition. But no one could explain why his dream was so specific or why it had come true. To this day, the FAA reportedly still uses the David Booth case in training scenarios, encouraging agents not to dismiss seemingly absurd reports too quickly. It's patterns of premonition. What connects these two cases is not just their accuracy, but their delivery. Frank Pastore spoke his fate on live radio. David Booth shared his vision with federal authorities. These weren't muttered superstitions or vague gut feelings. They were clear, confident, and public warnings, just days or even hours before death struck. And that's what makes them so disturbing. Most people avoid talking about death, let alone predicting it. But for reasons unknown, both men felt compelled to speak. And in doing so, They etched their stories into history not just as victims, but as reluctant prophets. Whether you believe in fate, divine intuition, or just terrifying coincidences, one thing is clear. Some people seem to know the end is near. They say it out loud. It's one thing for an ordinary person to make a cryptic prediction and vanish into history. But when someone famous does it, when a cultural icon, a global celebrity, a voice known to millions, speaks of their own end before it comes, the world takes notice. Some called it intuition. Others called it a cry for help. But when the prediction becomes reality, it leaves behind more than just mystery. It leaves legacy. These next two stories aren't about anonymous dreams or private diaries. They re-about famous people who spoke their deaths into existence and whose final words now echo in the halls of pop culture and legend. Number 6, Jim Morrison. The rock star who knew he'd be number 3 in 1970. The world was still spinning from the tragic deaths of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. Both had died young, both had overdosed, and both were 27 years old. Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors, watched the music world reel from their loss. But more than mourning, he began to fixate. He started telling friends he would be next. "You're drinking with number 3, he would say, laughing darkly. His girlfriend, Pamela Corson, later revealed that Jim spoke obsessively about death. He told her he didn't expect to live past 30, that he felt something chasing him, that fame had burned too hot, too fast in. Now the flame was flickering out. He wasn't suicidal in the traditional sense, but he believed he wouldn't make it much longer, that his death, like his music, would come suddenly and without explanation. And on July 3rd, 1971, in Paris, Morrison was found dead in his apartment's bathtub. No autopsy was performed. Official cause: heart failure, unofficial whispers. Drug overdose. He was 27, just like Hendrix, just like Joplin. The so-called 27 Club was born, and Jim Morrison had predicted his own membership with haunting certainty. To this day, fans debate whether he willed his end into existence or merely saw the inevitable coming. Either way, the man who sang "This Is the End" had spoken his truth long before the music stopped. Number 5, Brandon Lee. The actor who spoke the scene before it happened, Brandon Lee, son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, was on the cusp of becoming a star in his own right. In 1993, at just 28 years old, he was filming the dark, stylized action movie The Crow. It was the role of a lifetime. Tragic, edgy, symbolic, and it would become eerily prophetic. In one key scene, his character is shot during a home invasion. The script called for a gun loaded with blanks. But due to a horrifying series of production mistakes, the gun contained a fragment of a real bullet. When the trigger was pulled, Brandon collapsed on set. Everyone thought he was acting. He wasn't. He was bleeding out. He died later in the hospital. But here's where it gets strange. Months before the accident, Brandon had talked about the dangers of guns on set. He was reportedly uneasy about weapons safety and had expressed concerns to crew members. Even more bizarrely, he had once told a friend a story, possibly as a joke, about an actor who was accidentally shot while filming a scene and died. And he added, "Imagine if that was how I went." He said it before production began. He even carried a business card in his wallet that read, "The journey of life is short. Enjoy the ride." Brandon's death drew instant comparisons to his father's untimely and mysterious passing. Bruce Lee had died at 32, also at the height of his fame, also under odd circumstances. Some even believed there was a family curse. But in Brandon's case, the most haunting part was on just how he died. It was how close he came to describing it before it happened. The scene in which his character dies, it was left mostly intact in the film. The final version of The Crow became a cult classic, not just for its artistic merits, but because audiences felt like they were watching a ghost fulfill his own fate. The line between foreshadowing and fate, Morrison and Lee were both artists, one with words, the other with movement. Both were young, at the peak of their talents, and beloved by fans across the world. Both also had an eerie awareness that their time was limited. Their stories raise uncomfortable questions. Can we feel our death coming? Is there such a thing as subconscious preparation? Or are these simply moments of poetic tragedy that we assign meaning to in hindsight? Skeptics will say people say dark things all the time, And when one of those things lines up with reality, we give it too much weight. But believers argue that the mind, especially in deeply intuitive or creative, people can pick up on things the conscious brain ignores. One thing's for sure. When you say something out loud, something as serious as your own death, and it later comes true, people remember, they write it down, they quote you. They turn your words into legends. These two stories, unlike the others, were played out in the public eye. The world was watching and the world was stunned. Part 4. Murdered by Destiny. When visions turned real sometimes, people don't just predict their death, they write it, draw it, or see it before it happens. These aren't cases of illness or danger creeping in slowly. These are explosive, violent, irreversible ends that were spelled out in advance by the people who lived them. Their stories blur the line between imagination and reality, between coincidence and something far stranger. These next two men didn't just foresee death, they practically outlined it, and then it happened. Number 4, Arnold Schoenberg, The Fear That Killed Him. Arnold Schoenberg was one of the most influential and controversial composers of the 20th century. But besides music, he had another obsession: numerology. And more specifically, he had an intense phobia of the number 30, known as triskaidekaphobia. Would go out of his way to avoid the number in any context. He refused to label pieces with Opus 13, refused to live in a house that had the number 13 in the address. Even his birth date, September 13th, haunted him. As he aged, his fear worsened. Then one day, someone pointed out something that sent chills down his spine. He was turning 76 years old, and 7 plus 6 equals 13. Schoenberg panicked. He became convinced he wouldn't survive his 76th year. He told friends, his wife, his doctor even, wrote about it. The fear consumed him. He believed 76 wasn't just his age, was a warning. A mathematical death sentence. And on July 13th, 1951, just before midnight, Schoenberg died. At exactly 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the 14th, he died on the 13th day, in his 76th year, terrified to his final breath. Was it a coincidence? Or did his overwhelming belief manifest into physical collapse? His doctor listed the cause as heart failure due to extreme anxiety. In other words, the fear he had built his life around killed him. Number 3, General William L. Morgan. The dream that marked the hill William L. Morgan was a Civil War general in the Union Army. As the story goes, before a major campaign in 1864, Morgan reportedly told his officers about a recurring dream he'd been having. In it, he was riding with his men across a grassy hillside, when suddenly he was shot through the heart. He would then fall from his horse, and the dream would end. Morgan became so obsessed with this dream that he began describing the terrain in great detail to others. He claimed he would recognize the exact hill from the dream when he saw it in real life. His men rolled their eyes. They had more pressing concerns, like staying alive in an actual war. Then one afternoon, during a scouting mission in Kentucky, Morgan froze mid-conversation. His eyes locked on the terrain ahead. He pointed to a sloping green field and whispered, "That's it. That's the hill from my dream." His officers tried to laugh it off, but Morgan became visibly anxious. He paused the advance, adjusted his gear, and rode forward anyway. Moments later, a Confederate sniper hidden in the tree line fired a single shot. The bullet struck Morgan straight through the heart. He fell off his horse, dead before he hit the ground, just like the dream. The story spread quickly through the ranks. Some dismissed it as battlefield rumor. Others swore they heard him describe the hill days before the event. Military records confirmed the location and cause of death, but the eerie accuracy of Morgan's dream remains one of the Civil War's strangest personal legends: visions, patterns, and psychological time bombs. These two cases are unique because they combine specific detail with a sense of inevitability. Schoenberg's death was wrapped in math and phobia, his mind spiraling toward a heart attack. Morgan's came wrapped in a recurring dream so vivid, it guided him into a real-life bullet. They didn't just predict a general idea of death. They predicted how, when, and where, and they were right. Which raises a disturbing question. Can obsession become reality? Psychologists suggest that when someone believes in something strongly enough, especially something dark or traumatic hit, can create physiological effects. Stress, weakened immunity, heart strain. In extreme cases, belief alone can become lethal. But that still doesn't explain the geographic precision in Morgan's story, or the exact date of Schönberg's collapse. If these are just coincidences, they're among the most cinematic and terrifying ones in modern history. They're not alone. Some people fear death in silence, others shout it from the rooftops. But the most unsettling cases are when someone not only predicts their own death but leaves behind clear, documented clues. Not vague feelings, not poetic metaphors, specific timelines, public warnings, and detailed descriptions that only make sense after they're gone. Let us close with two of the most haunting examples, one from the world of hip-hop, the other from early Hollywood. Both cases leave behind more questions than answers and final words that still echo decades later. Number 2, Tupac Shakur, the rap prophet who saw it coming. Tupac wasn't just a rapper, he was a cultural force poet, activist, icon, and he was obsessed with death. It haunted his lyrics, dominated his interviews, and crept into every corner of his life. He often spoke about not living past 25. He predicted he would die young. He said again and again, "They're going to kill me." In a 1994 interview, 2 years before his death, he even joked darkly, "If I die, I want people to remember me as someone who gave everything." Then came September 7th, 1996. Tupac was in Las Vegas, attending a Mike Tyson fight. After the event, while riding in a car with Suge Knight, their vehicle was stopped at a red light. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside them. Gunshots rang out. Tupac was hit 4 times, died 6 days later at age 25. But here's the twist. Just months before his death, Tupac had filmed a music video for his song I Ain't Mada Cha, where he is shown being shot, dying, and ascending into heaven. The timing of its release right after his real-life murder was surreal, the symbolism uncanny. It's almost like he was writing his own exit. And then there, as his final album released under his stage, named Pac, the Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory. Nita, he adopts a new alias Machiavelli, named after Machiavelli, who famously faked his own death in literature. The album cover shows Tupac crucified. Was it all performance art? A prediction? A warning? To this day, some fans believe Tupac faked his death. Others believe he simply saw it coming. Either way, his story remains one of the most widely discussed and widely foretold celebrity deaths in modern music history. Number 1, Peg Entwistle. The star who jumped from the sign in the early 1930s, Peg Entwistle was a struggling actress in Los Angeles. She had performed on Broadway, had talent, and had just landed a small role in an RKO film. But Hollywood was brutal, and roles for women were fleeting. The fame she'd dreamt of never came. But what makes her story so eerie was indeed just how she died. It was what she wrote before it happened. In the weeks leading up to her death, Peg reportedly became withdrawn. She began writing in her diary that she felt invisible, trapped, and doomed to disappear. In one entry, she even described the Hollywood sign then, still reading Hollywoodland, as a final perch for someone the city forgot. On the night of September 16, 1932, Peg climbed the 50-foot letter H of the Hollywood sign and jumped. Her body was discovered 2 days later, along with a suicide note that read, "I'm afraid I'm a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this long ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." But the eeriest detail. Just 1 day after her death, a letter arrived at her house from RKO Pictures, offering her a lead role in a new film, where the main character commits suicide. Peg never saw it. She died believing she had no future in film. But she had written her own end. And it came. Today, Peg Entwistle's story is one of the most tragic and haunting tales in Hollywood history. And to some, she remains a ghost literally. Numerous reports of a woman in 1930s clothing near the Hollywood sign have been filed over the years. Whether real or imagined, her final act left a mark that never faded. Final thoughts, fate, or foreshadowing? So what do we make of all this? Some people believe these stories are examples of fate. Our lives are somehow written ahead of time, and a few of us just manage to read ahead in the script. Others believe they're simply tragic coincidences, made more eerie by hindsight. After all, many people fear death, but only a handful get it exactly right. But whether you believe in destiny, intuition, or something more mystical, one thing is undeniable. These people saw it coming. They said it, wrote it, dreamt it, and death answered. Maybe the universe leaves breadcrumbs. Maybe it whispers warnings in ways we don't fully understand. Or maybe the mind, under enough pressure, begins to see patterns that eventually play out. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is for certain. Some people don't just die. They announce it. And history never forgets. If you found these stories chilling, mysterious, or just plain mind-blowing, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with a friend who's into the weird, the unexplained, or just loves a good twist of fate. Hit that like button if your jaw dropped even once. Subscribe to Top Tier 10 so you never miss another story that sounds too crazy to be true, but is. And hey, drop a comment. Which of these stories creeped you out the most? Until next time, stay curious. And maybe don't say anything too specific about your own death, just in case.